Okay, today is Friday, June 6th, 2025. This is Stephen Fagin, curator of the Sixth Floor Museum, and this interview is part of our oral history project. And at the beginning of these, sir, I'll just ask you to give us your name, date and place of birth, and a little background about yourself to get us started, please.
My name is Kurt Alexander Dion. I am 30 years old. I was born September 9th, 1994 in Providence, Rhode Island. I currently reside in Washington, D.C., where I work as an education specialist at Historic Congressional Cemetery. I'm also an author of the book Presidential Grave Hunter: One Kid's Quest to Visit the Tombs of Every President and Vice President. I have been visiting the grave sites of historical figures and pop culture figures since I was 8 years old, starting and most passionate about the US presidents.
Wow. Well, let's start there. How did that project begin for you?
It started in a few different phases. So when I was 7 years old, my mother, Lynn, purchased me a book through a Scholastic books order form, and it was called So You Want to Be President, illustrated by David Small, authored by Judith St. George, and I was pretty much immediately taken by the illustrations, especially by David Small, of, say, William Howard Taft, famous for needing a larger size bathtub than average, and David Small illustrated President Taft being either lifted out of or into the bathtub by an industrial crane, by a construction worker wearing a hard hat. George Washington had numerous siblings, is trying to illustrate what that might be like. So it had Washington looking like an adult head Washington, but with a child's body, but then all these, different, bratty siblings pulling on his, wig and clothes and everything like that. Judith St. George's, anecdotes that accompanied the illustrations just really got me interested in, hey, these presidents were people just like me and everything. And I have an annoying little sibling, Olivia, and I resonate with that. And hey, that's funny that President Taft is being, lifted in or out of the bathtub with a, while he's also clutching a turkey leg and a champagne glass and everything. And I really became somebody infatuated with learning about the presidents. Then the following year, so that would have been around February 2002 that she ordered that book. Then the following year, I was 8 years old. Between third grade and fourth grade, I went to the Adams National Historical Park in Quincy, Massachusetts with my uncle Craig, his girlfriend Jennifer at the time, my sister Olivia, and I loved being able to go into the birthplace of John Adams, where he grew up, and the same thing with John Quincy Adams, his birthplace next door, and the family home later, and then going to the United First Parish Church, which has the crypt where the Adams presidents and first ladies are entombed. And I was like, I can go over their house and be where John Adams was when he was my age, 8 years old. And now I can go, this is John Adams, this is Abigail and Louisa and John Quincy. And I just loved that. And then a few months later, by which time I was the ripe old age of 9. My father was channel surfing and he stumbled across a re-airing of a book talk from C-SPAN about the book Who's Buried in Grant's Tomb, essentially really authored by staffer Carol Hellwig, but it's said by Brian Lamb, C-SPAN staff, and he was talking with presidential historian Richard Norton Smith about their separate travels to presidential grave sites. And I looked up at my father when he relayed this to me after, and I said, "Can we do that?" And that's how it started. And I spent the remainder of my public, school education in Cranston, Rhode Island, growing up, between on the vacations, summer and spring vacations, going to presidential grave sites, often going to their homes and presidential libraries as well.
What a supportive dad you have to to join you on this remarkable journey.
Yes, and my mother was just as supportive, but she had a more traditional, job working at the Veterans Affairs Hospital in Providence, where actually she still works. But my father, he had a business that was in the process of closing, and he had the more, schedule-wise, the flexibility and also the endurance to drive all around the country and everything that my mother's motion sickness gets in the way a bit would not have anyway.
Uh, in your studies of the presidents, where did John F. Kennedy rank for you? Was he a figure of particular interest or just another president?
I would say that he was definitely up there for me, John F. Kennedy, because when I first went to Arlington National Cemetery that summer of 2003, and I had been to again, the Adams crypt and everything, and that was in its own way kind of solemn a little bit, but not anything like going to the Kennedy gravesite in Arlington where they ask for silence and respect. And I remember just being around the other visitors there, going up those short steps and standing there looking at the eternal flame and the tombstones there, that there was just something eerie about it, something eerily quiet, and I could tell that everybody else around me was pretty sad. So as I got a little bit older and continued to learn more and more about Kennedy's presidency and especially the assassination, he was definitely up there for me in that regard because also my father, Paul, I should note, he was born in April of 1960. His very first memory when he was 3 years old is my grandmother, his mother, Catherine Deion, crying while watching President Kennedy's funeral. He remembers it was the TV, he described it as it being in like a blonde cabinet, or the wood was blonde as he um, describes it. So that was something that people that I knew remembered very well. As I say in the beginning of my book, you go to James Garfield's elaborate tomb in Cleveland, Ohio. Nobody's alive from 1881 that it's still in their memories or anything like that. So Kennedy is still real for people that I knew that have now passed, and but even people that I still know to this day.
Hmm. Your dad's early childhood memories, I mean, it syncs so well with so many of the young people from the 60s that I've spoken to as part of this project. I can't tell you how many people reflect on how their earliest memories is either funeral coverage on television or seeing a grown-up cry for the first time. I should talk to your dad as well and get those memories as part of this project. But it's gratifying in many ways that those recollections, you've become a custodian of those and taken them with you as you embarked on something like this. I have not been to very many presidential grave sites myself, but I imagine with the eternal flame and the beautiful landscaping there at Arlington that Kennedy's, it must rank up there as far as one of the more beautiful and serene settings for a presidential grave site.
Oh, certainly. The one that always becomes the comparative butt of jokes is the eighth president, Martin Van Buren, and how he's in a little roadside cemetery in Kinderhook, New York. And, it's very appropriate for him. This is where he was born, lived, died. It's rather quaint, but if you're not paying attention, you go by and never know that a U.S. president was there. You're not going to encounter that with obviously John F. Kennedy's, and people travel from around the country and the world. Just go over the bridge from Washington D.C. and go pay respects there. So, and comparatively, even in the same cemetery, there's another U.S. president, William Howard Taft, and another First Lady, Helen Taft, and they're not too far of a walk from the Kennedys, but they're often comparatively forgotten. Even our first trip as a family in 2003, we didn't go see the Tafts. So I had to get them the next year, 2004.
Hmm. As a young person, give me a sense, and I know we're kind of repeating some of the stuff you put into the book, but for the benefit of people who have not read the book, give me a sense as a young person what you took away from getting to visit these grave sites, kind of the connection to that history, the immediacy of being able to stand right there where that president was buried.
So, as you said, I touched upon in the book and a little bit before, it's again hammering home to myself that these were real people. They were alive and breathed air just like I did, and they walked some of these same streets, and they're not, just totally lost forever. They're not just people on pages or on, TV screens with documentaries. I can go see here is where in the physical sense their story concluded and where either they decided or somebody who was in charge, like their spouse or children, decided this is where they are going to end up, their corporeal remains and be commemorated or visited or if somebody's not happy, scorned, or looked down upon and everything. And it just was really interesting to me again to be this is where this person that I've read about, watched about, ended up in that sense, but also going to other places connected with them as well. So hands-on history, going to for example, Dealey Plaza, and I've felt shivers go down my spine or chills four times in my life, and seeing Dealey Plaza for the first time was one of them, and that was I was 17 years old, and that was just so jarring to having seen it in so many of the films and the photos and read about it, and it's like there it is, and so much of it unchanged, or at least if things have changed, like the fence on the grassy knoll replaced, it's a pretty close replica and everything, and that was jarring. And going other places, like the only house that Abraham Lincoln ever owned is in Springfield, Illinois, now under the National Park Service, and I was 9 years old, and they invited those of us who were on tour to put our hand on the actual railing. They said that this is the original railing that the Lincolns used. We encourage you to put your hands on it. And I'm on videotape at the time, and you could just my mouth is agape as I'm walking up the steps there, putting my hand where Abraham Lincoln's hand was and Mary Lincoln's hand. And some other Kennedy examples are I dined at the Union Oyster House in Boston, where Kennedy would often go, and it was a long wait, and I wasn't necessarily the biggest fan of the food, but it was still, oh, here's where many famous people over the years have eaten, going back to even Daniel Webster, but they had the Kennedy booth marked off where he would go eat. And here in Washington, D.C., Martin's Tavern, they have the booth marked off where he proposed to Jacqueline. And going to the birthplace in Brookline, which I have beef with, actually. I will just briefly say that on a side tangent that when I first went to the house in 2010, they had it the correct colors to what it was in 1917. But then a few years later, they repainted it to reflect what Rose Kennedy had it painted briefly in the 60s. So now instead of like green and cream, it's like a gray, and it's so if anybody is reading this or listening to this in the future, please implore the John F. Kennedy National Historic Site to repaint the birthplace to the accurate color that it was in 1917. But still, it was cool to be able to go into the house and see the interior look like 1917.
Yeah. I want to talk more about your visit to Dealey Plaza and of course your interactions with Jim Leavelle, but you visited, I believe, a couple of grave sites that were associated with the assassination, like Judge Sarah T. Hughes, and also Oswald out at Rose Hill. Can you share any reflections you have about going to those sites?
Absolutely. So, by that time, I was a senior in high school, and I had already visited, at the time, there were 38 deceased presidents. I'd already visited 37 of them. So, just Lyndon Johnson remaining. This was in 2012. And I also had expanded my interest a bit. I was clearly I was running out of presidents, and I was just a little more worldly, so I was incorporating other people as well on this trip. So we got in Dick Night Train Lane, Pro Football Hall of Famer, Stephen F. Austin, and then being in that area around the assassination, was able to get graves of other people connected to it, like you said. So. Sarah T. Hughes, she's in Dallas, and she's actually in the same mausoleum as baseball great Mickey Mantle. So I got the two of them there. There's other famous people at that cemetery. I'll have to go back sometime and get some more actually. So I'll revisit Judge Sarah Hughes again. So only or the first woman who sworn in a U.S. president there, Lyndon Johnson. Oh, we also visited J.D. Tippit, the officer that Oswald's killed. Got him in Dallas. Abraham Zapruder, of course, of the Zapruder film, visited him as well. So again, just showing some of these people who never thought that they were going to intersect with presidential history, and that's another great thing is it's the presidency is even bizarre events like assassinations aside, it's, there's a president, but then there's all these other people that intersect with their lives and their jobs and, make the history. It's not just the president. So it's important to me to go see these other people who were factors in the assassination as well. So Lee Harvey Oswald, yes, we went out to Fort Worth, and that's where we saw the of course, next to it, the interesting Nick Beef uh, marker as well. And now I know Nick Beef, which is bizarre. So I actually have him in my cell phone. So he's an interesting individual. Lives in New York, and that's his station. And he's not actually planning on being buried there in Fort Worth. But there was somebody else that was there visiting Oswald as well, and somewhere I still have their business card. I think it's probably back up at my parents' house in Rhode Island, but it was like a sock monkey puppet was on the card. So that was interesting because sometimes you never know. Sometimes you go to a cemetery and you're the only person there, and then sometimes you run into other people that are there to visit the exact same person that you are if you're looking for a historical figure. So that was interesting. None of them on that trip were too hard to find, though. We knew how to find Oswald looking at a mausoleum that's nearby, and Sarah Hughes maybe took a few minutes because there's a big mausoleum there, Sparkman Hill, but. Yeah, so it was quite an interesting trip, but nothing topped the meeting of Mr. Leavelle, the former homicide detective.
Right. In your chapter on Leavelle, I think you start by expressing that the Kennedy assassination, at least by the time you were a teenager, had really become a topic of some interest to you. Can you give me a sense about some of the books you had read or documentaries you had watched that kind of fostered that interest?
So I would say definitely a lot of documentaries by that point, especially there was one. Remember in particular there was one about the magic bullet, quote unquote. And I remember Gary Mack from the then of the sixth floor museum was involved with that. And so I've seen documentaries, I believe, about all three of the shots that occurred. Although actually the the first one that missed, that might have been a later documentary, but just really being invested in what happened. And of course, there's so many conspiracy theories, and I'm not a generally conspiracy theorist, but I'm like, well, okay, what are the facts, and can this be scientifically done, and what's the proof and everything? And there was one that leading up to meeting Mr. Leavelle that was very impactful. It was from 2008 originally. I believe it was called JFK Inside the Target Car. And I watched a re-airing of this on the Discovery Channel. And in the Pulitzer Prize winning photograph of Lee Harvey Oswald being shot by Jack Ruby, that was taken by Robert Jackson, Mr. Lavelle, the gentleman in the light colored suit and the resistol hat, he struck me as he looked a bit older and everything. So when I saw him in this documentary, I was greatly surprised that he was even alive when this was. But turns out that at the time of the Oswald shooting in 1963, Mr. Lavelle was just 43 years old. He just maybe looked a little bit older. So that was a very impactful one, certainly because that's the one that put me on the path to trying to even find Mr. Lavelle's mailing address. So I would say that the documentaries, especially, were some of the more in-depth things I had taken in prior to meeting Mr. Lavelle, as opposed to some books. I had, some books, but they didn't really touch upon the assassination in great detail comparatively.
You characterized meeting Lavelle and spending, I guess, an hour or so with him as like a real high point of your life. I mean, a very impactful experience. Tell me a little bit about how that came to be and what it was like to spend some time with him.
So we actually spent a total of 3 hours with Mr. Lavelle, just only about one of it on camera. So watching the documentary, again, JFK inside the Target car, I was thinking, oh my goodness, he's still alive. I had my website, kurtzhistoric sites.com. I had had since I was 14 years old. I still have it today. And I thought, wow, this would be great to interview him for my website, especially when I learned not only was he connected to JFK and Oswald and all that, but he was also at Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, when it was attacked. So I knew I can't. Is there any way I can contact this man? So there, I looked on the internet, and sure enough, I found a mailing address for Garland, Texas. So with the help of my dad, so I wrote him a letter. My dad helped me with the, self-address, already stamped envelope and everything, so it wouldn't cost him anything to write back to us. And we sent it in the mail, and 3 days later, 91-year-old Mr. Lavelle had emailed me, and I had explained in the letter I'm going to be going down to Texas in April to get my last presidential grave. I'm 17 years old, a high school senior. I'd love to interview you for my history website. And again, 91-year-old Mr. Lavelle emailed me back saying, "That's great, Kurt. Sounds like you have an ambitious trip ahead of you. Here's my cell phone number and everything." So it was just amazing. And then at the same time, my father and I were working on a television show concept called Scofflaws, with the subtitle sometimes of America's Least Wanted. And it was about exploiting and satirizing what we thought were ridiculous laws, rules, and policies in over the top, inane ways with our friends. And one thing that shortly thereafter got my father's attention, and I should preface this by saying that my father on the back of my book is called Zany and Boundary Pushing, which might be an understatement. My father's friend, Mike Paquin from Philly, he told my dad about at the coming 2012 Republican National Convention that there was a rule that was instituted that within a certain perimeter of the convention, squirt guns and super soakers were going to be prohibited, and you could potentially get arrested for having these items. Whereas within that same perimeter, at least again up to a certain point, actual guns, firearms, would be permitted. And my father thought, this is ridiculous. You're going to get arrested for having a super soaker or squirt gun. So then he thought, wait a minute, we're trying to work on getting some good promo materials for our television concept, and we have this interview lined up with Mr. Leavelle. What if we recreated the Pulitzer Prize winning photograph taken by Robert Jackson with Mr. Leavelle and Kurt, you're Oswald and I'm Ruby and everything. And I wanted nothing to do with this because that sounded so bizarre. And I had this serious history interview lined up with this Pearl Harbor survivor. And I didn't want this to blow it out of the water or feel like we were being glib or disrespectful or anything. And my father's like, no, well, he won't see it that way, and he'll see that, we're just making fun of the super soaker law and everything. And so eventually we started gathering up some costumes and things like that. My father got the exact same style hat that Ruby wore, except my dad's head was bigger. Take that however you want it, as I would said on my C-SPAN interview with Brian Lamb, I believe. But we didn't tell Mr. Leavelle in advance because my dad didn't want to give him the opportunity to say no in advance and like cancel the interview or anything. But we needed a photographer as well. My mother, Lynn, in March, she came down with some kind of mysterious illness, and that threw off, it was going to be a family trip, the four of us, both my parents, my sister, myself. So we ended up through a friend, Troy, ended up hiring a photographer, Dylan Hollingsworth, that he knew, and that he was going to accompany us and take the photograph, this recreation. Now, one important thing was we were going to do it at the end of our time with Mr. Leavelle, though. So let him warm up to us, do the straightforward, straight edge history interview first. But then I remember, I think we were in a Target trying to buy a hat for Mr. Leavelle in case he didn't have one. My dad said we have to be prepared, so he bought some lame hat. Uh, but Mr. Leavelle called us that he had actually just had a medical scare and went to the hospital. And but he was back home, but he now had a doctor's appointment the day that, oh, I believe it was a Monday, that we were supposed to meet with him. So this would have been a Saturday, April 21st that he called us. So we were supposed to meet on the 23rd, and he's like, I can't meet you on the 23rd now. Can you come over tomorrow, Sunday the 22nd? And so we're scrambling and everything. So of course we say yes. What other choice do we have? Then we contact Dylan, and Dylan had a prior commitment, like a family reunion or something. And we're like, oh no. But he said, okay, but he's like, I have to be there by this time, but I can go with you for a little bit. So that means that we had to switch things up, and we had to, because of Dylan's availability, we had to ask Mr. Leavelle right away. The first thing was, hey, can we do this kind of bizarre project that we didn't clear with you first? And yeah, I'm way more reserved than my father. We go in, and we carried the stuff in with us again because my dad's like, we didn't want to be like, oh no, it's in the car, don't get it, worry about it. So then we go in, we brought Mrs. Leavelle some flowers. This was at a assisted living facility. By the way, because Mrs. Leavelle, I believe, had like onset of Alzheimer's. So it was in there, they were in there for that reason. But they both greeted us, and there was a facility worker in there with Mrs. Leavelle, and we gave Mrs. Leavelle flowers, and then she stepped away, and then we went into Mr. Leavelle's office, and then here came the crazy pitch where my father's, trying to say, again, we're not meaning to disrespect what happened in any way or your experience or the Kennedy assassination. We're just trying to, satirize what we believe is this absurd law and use the notoriety of this Pulitzer Prize winning image to enhance the satirical level and prominence of it and everything. And Dylan, meanwhile, is snapping a series of photographs, and you can see me there on Mr. Lavelle's couch, and I'm just so concerned and nervous the whole time. You can just see the worry on my face that my dad is going to horrendously offend this World War II veteran and and everything, former, homicide detective. And Mr. Lavelle was very, very sharp for 91, especially, say, but very sharp and with it. And he was actually a proponent of more people should have guns and everything, and thought everybody would be safer that way with more guns on the street. And he agreed with the premise that, it was ridiculous what was going on in Florida with that, and he was totally on board. So he saw the one thing though is that then when we were outside staging it, he saw the lame hat that my dad had bought just in case. He's like, I'm not wearing that. Hold on. And then he went in and got a better hat that he would actually wear in real life. But if you look at the series of photos of the inside, you can see just the fear and trepidation on my face just melted away, and I'm just like grinning and everything that, okay, we didn't totally offend this historical figure and a World War II veteran or anything. So then we did the recreation, and we brought fake handcuffs that we got at like iParty or Party City or something, and I was handcuffed to, with the fake handcuffs to Mr. Lavelle, and just like he did with Oswald when he grabbed him, because he was handcuffed to him, he couldn't yank him back as far as he would have otherwise liked with Ruby, but he had his hand in his waistband and pulled it back. So Mr. Lavelle got his hand on my waistband, and we turned it and everything. And it's a very remarkable photo. It is the lock screen on my phone, and I don't think that's ever gonna change it. I will never be in a more unique or interesting photograph in my life. Of course, it didn't always, 99% of people have actually been okay with it and fascinated by it and everything. There's only one person I really remember. It was after in 2015, Brian Lamb, one of the people who inspired me to go on this presidential quest, he interviewed me on his show Q&A on C-SPAN, and afterward there was one person on Twitter who said something like, satire isn't always funny. And why would this be funny? This is wrong. Sad. Hashtag Kurt Dion. So I was 20 at that point. I was like, okay, So I respect the opinion. Again, it was not my idea, but it's been a very, unique photograph. And later I have a signed copy, blow up of the print of the photograph, and Mr. Lavelle signed it to Kurt, glad it was not you. So that was the prelude to then the hour-long historical interview that we did.
Mhm. Did you gain any insights as far as the assassination and Oswald's guilt that maybe had not occurred to you prior to that?
Well, I would say, again, because Mr. Lavelle was very sharp with the details and everything. There were things that definitely for me were new. I'm sure not to, the most seasoned, person who had been studying it for decades or anything. But one question that had escaped me the answer, that is, to a question, was how exactly Ruby got down into the basement, because I said there were all these people. I believe it was a Commerce Street where they were planning on exiting, but he went in through the Main Street side of the ramp because it just goes one side of the building down and the other. And he explained that there had been one officer there, but that they were really lax with it, and they were just focusing on, oh, this is where he's going to come out, not the other entrance. But then because the armored car was had gone down, I believe again the Commerce Street exit ramp had gone in backwards, that was blocking a squad car from going out. So the squad car had to back up out the Main Street entrance, and the officer that was stationed there had to step away. I believe said it was about 10 steps or so, block oncoming traffic so that the squad car could get out. And is when that officer he was turned there that Ruby then snuck down into the basement, where only about a minute later he shot Oswald. So a lot of those details were new to me, and he was saying that, and when he was corroborating later, what happened, and um, Jack Ruby told Mr. Leavelle that it was Officer Rio Pierce that was backing up in the squad car, and then Mr. Leavelle was asking other officers, like, who was that? And they couldn't even tell Mr. Leavelle who it was. But then the captain said, oh, I sent Rio Pierce out and everything. So then Mr. Leavelle knew, oh, okay, Ruby's actually telling the truth, because he said even my own officers didn't know who it was, but so only the captain knew, and he confirmed it. And he said that Ruby knew who Rio Pierce was, the officer, because he was on Vice, and so he had been in and out of the Carousel Club that Ruby owned a few times, so he would have known his identity. So that was interesting, and then also how Mr. Lavelle's involvement continued after the Oswald shooting, and how he transferred Ruby the next day, and some of his investigation. That was also new to me as well. So Mr. Leavelle went to the Western Union office, he said, trying to retrace Ruby's steps, because Ruby had sent out a $25 money order to, I believe it was a Karen Bennett Carlin, I believe, was his worker. She was over in Fort Worth. She needed money for rent, and how that was time stamped at 11/17, and that then Ruby, just was able to get to the basement of City Hall Police Headquarters there by, it was 11:21 that he shot Oswald, and how Mr. Leavelle went, I think he said, three different ways, and he timed it, and average it took 2.5 minutes. So he said it was entirely feasible and all that. So it was interesting to get, in particular, I'd say that insight from him more about Ruby's actions and all that.
Mm-hmm. Well, as you mentioned, you have written a book about your journey, your experiences. Give me a sense of how people have responded. Like, what have people said about your exploration of presidential grave sites and historic sites as a kid?
Oh, the response has been tremendously positive, which is great, because, it didn't make me the most popular person growing up, when I was in fourth and fifth grade and all that. But it took me a little while to find my people, I'd say. But the response has been great. Last I looked, I think it's got like a 4.6 star rating out of 5 on Goodreads, and maybe like a 4.8 or something on Amazon, and only one they're all 4 and 5 star reviews, except for one person left a 2 star review that doesn't sting at all. But it's also, they're all subjective and everything, but it's great to hear such great feedback. And actually, probably the two most popular chapters from the feedback that I've gotten more in detail, including from, friends and everything, are actually the two chapters that don't focus on the graves much. It's more with the living people. The chapter where my father and I met Jimmy and Rosalind Carter down in Plains, Georgia in June 2013, and then the interview with Mr. Leavelle in April 2012. So the Mr. Leavelle chapter is actually a part of the book that has really resonated and connected with people that and they've enjoyed it. So that's great. And I've had a bunch of book talks at different places. The Harry Truman Presidential Library in Independence, Missouri, the Brown Bookstore in Providence, Rhode Island, which was very important to me because that's where I attended a book signing for President Bill Clinton in 2005 when I was 10, and that's its own chapter. And then I got to bring it full circle by doing a little reading from that chapter in the bookstore. So very meta, as they would say. It's been great, and it's been out for a little over 2 years now, and I still have, some events here and there. I have a book talk at Grant's Cottage, where President Ulysses Grant died in Wilton, New York. That's this coming October. So it's a, I think it's a time well, I would say a timeless book rather. It's not dependent on that. It's relevant at any time. There's nothing that specifically, dates it, and it's a journey that other people take up, and again, it can resonate, and they can still, people be able to read it. Just take the Mr. Leavelle chapter. They'll be able to read it and take stuff from it, at any point in the future. It's not like, oh, this is going to be stale or anything in 5, 10 years. So,
Mhm. As an adult now, as we lose later presidents, will you make pilgrimages to their grave sites just to make sure you have that completion?
yes, absolutely. So I, since the passing of again, the last one at that point had been um, Gerald Ford, I believe, when I first completed my quest. But then since then, Bush Senior's died, Jimmy Carter has died, and I'm planning on paying my respects to Jimmy Carter and Rosalind Carter once the gravesite opens to the public. But yes, I've continued to build on that, and again, I've expanded so much now, or you could call it jumping the shark, but I've been to over 2,600 historical and pop culture figure grave sites in, I believe, 31 states in Washington, D.C. So um,
Mm.
I'm always it's a lifelong journey, my father says, with all the grave sites and historic sites and everything.
Well, that is great. That's wonderful. And I hope if you're back in Dallas, you'll revisit Dealey Plaza and give us a chance to meet in person. And you can visit Jim Leavelle's gravesite here as well. I'm sure he would appreciate that, considering the remarkable afternoon you spent together.
Yes, absolutely. And when I should also add that, down in Dallas, not just the grave sites, but we went to other places like where J.D. Tippit was shot. And then it was just a few months later, I think, that it was kind of all cleaned up. And then they put a historical marker there. But it wasn't in place in April 2012. But I went to the Texas Theater where Oswald was arrested. And probably most interestingly, as far as the other sites too, was we went to the Dallas Municipal Building where Oswald was shot, and the places that like where he was shot were off limits, but we were able to connect with a an officer there. I guess it was just a court at that time. Officer Cliff. I don't remember if that was his first name or his last name, but he said, come back on my lunch break. We had name dropped Mr. Leavelle. We said we spent, yesterday with him and everything, and interviewed him, and could we possibly go down and see the site? He said, come back during my lunch break, and he brought us not only down to where Oswald was shot by Ruby in the garage, but also to Oswald's cell and the interrogation room. And at that time, in 2012, there was a real danger where not the parking garage, but those other sites within the building were going to be gutted as it was taken over, I believe, by the University of North Texas, Dallas College of Law. And so it's possible that Yeah, that was all going to be gone. So we took my photo in Oswald's cell, took video in the interrogation room, and I was glad to see that later, at least the cell, I don't know about the interrogation room, but at least certain aspects like the cell were preserved and can now be visited. But at the time in 2012, it was also like the building, these areas were kind of falling apart and there were loose wires and everything. So it'd be nice to go back again and what I thought was going to be a once in a lifetime opportunity with that is maybe not, and I can go experience it again, which is great. But the Mr. Leavelle interview is certainly once in a lifetime opportunity, and now right, he passed in 2019 at age 99. So at some point we'll go and pay my respects to my friend Jim as well, I guess. I said when he was signing a poster for me, he said, "Do you want me to sign it, James?" Or he said, "For my friends, I sign it, Jim." And my dad and I both said, "Whatever you feel comfortable with, Mr. Leavelle." And he signed it as Jim. So that made me feel nice. Unless that was a line that he just gave everybody. But
Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you'd like to share for this project? Any other stories or memories, particularly from Dallas?
I don't think there's anything in particular that really stands out that we did from Dallas in particular that we didn't mention. Although I did print out, I occasionally write poems, and I actually took two poetry classes in college at Bryant University in Smithfield, Rhode Island. And so one I did was actually about the Kennedy assassination. So I thought that maybe I could read the poem for the record.
Please, yes.
A Nightmare on Elm Street, November 26th. Sorry, let me start over again because that's embarrassing, especially as I'm reading it. A Nightmare on Elm Street, November 22nd, 1963. Nothing turned as quickly as that dream did into a nightmare. From merry shouts to wails, glowing faces to funeral veils, America watched as its president, a young flame of hope, was snuffed out in the back seat of a Lincoln, of all places. And nothing turned as slowly as that car did down Elm Street when the worst kind of fireworks shot out to ring in a new era and a wife's cheery pink overcoat became murderous red, speckled with clumps of blood and brains that showered it like parade confetti.
Wow. That's powerful. Thank you for sharing that. That's unexpected.
My journey is all filled with the unexpected. So.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me. Sometime next week, I'll send you a link so you can download a copy of this recording. And as I'm sure you know, we do carry your book in our store. So if you're here in Dallas, you can sign the copies that we have. That would be terrific.
Absolutely, and I am on a quest right now. My main quest now is to complete the Supreme Court Justice graves. There were 105 late Supreme Court justices. I visited the graves of 86, but one is in Dallas, so I would love that. And I don't know, so to go visit again, sign the books, and I don't know if you ever have author events or anything, but I would be, definitely more than willing to, talk about President Kennedy, both related to and unrelated to the assassination, if the opportunity arises at the sixth floor museum.
Yeah, we will have to plan that. That would be great. We do daytime talks on Friday, so that would be a great opportunity to share your story with people. So thank you so
Okay.
much for talking with me today.
Oh, thank you so much, Stephen.